Hey guys, welcome to my lecture on indifference and thresholds in poker strategy. Today I would like to share with you my thoughts and experiments when it comes to indifference and why the modern thought of game theory optimal versus exploitative strategy is sort of a non sequitur, and why by studying indifference we can show how they are one and the same coin. I know this is a little bit more of an advanced idea in studying, but this video is for some of more of the advanced players that are using solvers and that have a good grasp on Nash equilibrium and game theory optimal strategy when it comes to playing no limit Texas Hold'em. By going over these ideas, I hope to convince the naysayers of game theory optimal strategy and people who will rely on quote unquote exploitative strategy, and I will show why you can sort of use both to maximize expected value when playing poker. I also think that this is would be fine for even a novice coming into poker and studying the game could learn a lot from this also. And guys, I just want to say thank you for watching these videos and giving me the time out of your busy day to listen to me ramble about my favorite thing in the world, which is poker and its strategy. So please like and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. The contents of this lecture are going to be first, defining and understanding the idea of indifference. Secondly, defining and understanding the idea of thresholds. Third, I'm going to use these ideas to learn how to study poker and to actually apply it to the game. Fourthly, I'm going to use a sample hand to further explain the way to study, and I'm going to try to simplify it for you guys because I think a lot of this is going to sound really complicated, but it's not. And then I'm going to go over a summary. So that's the contents, and we'll move on to the first important slide. Indifference. So the Oxford English definition is, just to quickly lay it out, it's a noun. It means the lack of interest, feeling, or reaction towards somebody or something. Meaning, you just don't care. How does this how does this idea manifest in a solver, or I guess a computer? That's when an idea in a strategy is known to be indifferent. It just means that all it means is that it's close to zero EV. Why does this matter? Why does indifference matter to poker strategy, specifically No Limit Hold'em, since that's the game that I'm most familiar with and that we're going to go over in this lecture. But indifference matters because when formulating a poker strategy, we use a range of hands that you guys all know what a range is. It's whatever the hands are, whatever the hands a player can have. And there's going to be certain hands within that node that are going to take a certain line. So when I say node, that's a decision point. So when a certain node says to bet at a certain frequency, let's say 100% of the time the solver is using a 1/3 pot size bet with every hand in its range. So on that node, there's going to be certain hands that have different expected values than others. For example, on a king 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 board, ace king is going to have basically maximum EV. So let's say the pot is 100. On a king 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 board, ace king is going to have 100 EV, expected value. It's going to have also 100% equity, but all that is equity is just EV divided by times the percentage of the time it's going to win it in the long run. On a king board, ace king can't lose because no matter what the run out is, you will not be able to lose. So it has 100 EV. Now, there's going to be hands, and we'll get into the hands. I'm going to give an example hand, a hand I actually played recently. Um, there's going to be hands within that range that have a lower EV than 100. If the pot's 100, we're talking about the pot has chips that in the middle there's $100 in it. So if the pot has $130 in it, then the EV would be 130 since it has a 100% 100% equity. So there's going to be hands in that range at what we call the bottom of the range that um, are going to have very low EV, and some of it might actually be close to zero EV. And these hands are what we're going to be called indifferent, meaning those hands don't care either way of the two major decisions, which would be in this case, if we have the initiative, it would be bet or check. These hands could go either way because they have zero EV. And the point of these hands is for balance. This is why this matters. If these hands are not in the range, then the solver playing at a perfect equilibrium strategy can exploit someone by not using these zero EV hands by doing whichever decision that that makes those negative EV more often. I do agree with the exploitative crowd, so to speak, that these zero EV indifferent hands um, don't actually need to be balanced. But we will go into that when we go into the actual hand, and because you'll be able to see more clearly what I'm talking about. The second thing, what is a threshold? The Oxford Standard definition is the level at which something starts to happen or to have an effect. What does that mean in terms of poker? It means, aka, also known as, the hands that are at zero EV. How do we use this to study? Well, this is the gist of it. Okay, you need the way you use this to study is you look at the EV, you look at the zero or close to zero EV hands that you think your opponent could still have in his range, and you exploit what they are not doing with those hands. So if a person doesn't have enough zero EV hands in their range, then you don't show as much aggression because their range isn't wide enough. Or if they are folding those zero EV hands too often, then you bet or raise more than often. So why do these ideas matter? Well, as everything in poker strategy, it's used to maximize expected value. Okay, that should just be the answer for every single thing in poker strategy, but and it sounds sort of, I guess, elementary or obvious. Of course, we are going to maximize expected value, but really, what we're doing is we are exploiting someone's lack thereof of knowing how to maximize their own strategy, and we're taking advantage of them, aka exploitation. This is the foundation of exploitative strategy. So, I was playing at the Jack last week. We were playing a three blind game. It was 5, 10, 25. I was the biggest blind, so the last blind I was 25. And a young player under the gun raised to 3.5x. Everyone folded, and I called from the biggest blind. And the flop came 10, 6, 5 rainbow. I had ace 7 of spades. The opponent, I checked, which, so I just want you to know, I think this is a board that favors my range more than his range. So and I know that he c bets kind of too often. And he did bet half pot, which is a non-standard sizing, and I raised to full pot. He called. The king of spades came on the turn, now bringing a nut flush draw for me. I bet two-thirds, and he quickly folded. So I want to know. I would like to tell you why this hand was exploitative and not GTO. I don't think it was GTO, but we're going to learn from the solver. It's going to be a little bit of both. That's sort of the whole point of my whole point of this is that why I decided to bet on the turn. Yes, it gave me enough flush draw, but this actually sort of might favor him. So I'll bring up the solve and we'll go into that. The flop does favor me a lot. I'm gonna have a lot of suited cards and low connected cards that are gonna favor me much more than the in position raiser. So it actually likes me range betting third pot size bet with all of my range at a pretty decent frequency. I want to figure out how to beat my specific opponent. He's a kid that sort of doesn't, I don't think, understands these certain concepts, so I knew to take advantage of him. Thought process I had in my head was, do I donk or do I check raise? And I thought there would be more EV in check raising. He bets 50%, which is a ridiculous sized bet, but we'll see what the solver does here. And as you can see, solver is folding a lot of this middling trash. Folds out king queen off most of the time actually, and a lot of these higher cards. Um, Surprisingly, it folds most of Jack 9, Jack 8, which you would think wouldn't because, but it has to do with blockers. Uh, the continuing range of the better should block a lot of these hands. And with my specific hand, actually, I figured out to raise. See this in red is going to be the check raise, and we did do it with these combos here, this combo here, and it's gonna have, oops, right here, it's gonna have roughly 21 EV. So yeah, it has a decent amount of EV. So I did go ahead and raise, and he called. His calling range should be pretty condensed, as you can see. He's not gonna have so this is what I sort of thought was in his range. These types of hands that are going to be I'm going to getting folds from. The hands that are going to be calling, okay, clearly the nutted hands like tens and sixes and fives I'm drawing dead to, and he's never folding, so that doesn't really matter. But these hands, I mean, even queens and kings could call and then probably fold on a later street. So he did call, and we got the king of spades. Ace seven of spades is mainly a check, and really the only hands that are betting are the hands with severe blockers, which like the sixes and fives, and obviously the straights. Almost 60% of range is actually checking over here. But went ahead and bet, and this is what I'm trying to argue in this video is that by using the thresholds of a game theory optimal strategy, you can form an exploitative strategy. Okay, this right here, my range, doesn't matter. It's his range. Okay, so what happens when I bet two-thirds or like 70%? He's supposed to call with these hands only. Okay, now the exploit here is this threshold. Okay, he is not he is not going to have these in his range because I know this player. He's just going to raise like this condensed range up here. Sorry, it's not condensed, but it's like top heavy and up. All these and up. And he's not going to have this. He's not going to know this threshold. So when I say thresholds, I'm talking about this. When faced with the bet, what are the hands that you are continuing with and what are you not? So you got to look at your thresholds here. And this would be like a threshold. King Ace 5, ace 6. You need to be mixing every action. It's almost a pure mix with ace 6. So so the because I know that he does not have these hand. I mean, Queen 9 suited has to call half the time. Queen 8 suited, Queen Jack suited. These hands that need to balance his calling range are not going to be there because he's just going to pure fold these. Let's just say he got here with this. He's going to pure fold these. This blue is going to be at all the way. It's going to be 100%. So you got to look at your thresholds and you got to look at yourself. Okay, when faced with this check raise bet line, where are my thresholds? My thresholds are queen 9 half the time, queen 8 half the time. So you got to know like this is what your range looks like and your thresholds are going to be like, well, it could even be further exemplified before the bet. So what is he using to bet on this flop? My thresholds are ace 3 and down are basically pure folding. Just gonna call this pure fold. So your threshold is ace 3 and down, king 4 and down, pocket threes and down, so pocket deuces, ace jack, king jack. These are my offsuit thresholds. So these are not continuing. Sorry, these are not continuing. My thresholds. You got to know your offsuit thresholds, which is your ace, jack, king jack, queen jack. So anything with the jack, because so it seems like a jack is a negative blocker, and then and so those are your thresholds from the top down. The equities morph the hand. And these hands, king 8, king 9 suited, these are the hands that need to be folding majority of the time. So the opponent does not want these 8s in the hand. So when you have the 8 in the hand, here, let's see, he's not going to be continuing with, you want him to be continuing with those types of hands, okay? So you can use that 8 as a negative blocker to know which ones to continue with. And the reason why it's exploitative is because we know that he is not continuing with these frequencies. Okay? And I don't necessarily think you need a computer to to show this. That's the point. Okay? Is that you don't necessarily need a computer to know. Let's just call this 40%. Okay? King 6 suited is a pure call. King 5 mixes 50-50 pure. I'm sorry, 50, it's not pure, 50-50. Okay. Aces mixes but mainly a call. So my argument is that without even looking at this, you can deduce that he's going to be over folding to this king. Now, the king does favor his range because you're going to have a lot of these cards up here, but since he's over folding all these, then we could when the king comes up, because he's supposed to be folding a lot of his overcard kings, because his range needs to be strong. He can't float this flop. This flop is so favorable for the big blind that he can't float these hands. That when the king of spades comes on the turn, the only kings he has in his range, besides pocket kings, which he's always going to have, is king 10 suited. King 6 and King 5. Do you think the average 5-10 player, this is a 5-10-25 game, but we'll just call it 2-5 to 5-10 player knows that he needs to keep King 5, King 6, King 10 suited in his range to balance the King spade on the turn? I argue no, and this is an exploit. I'm exploiting it because he doesn't have any of these in his range. He doesn't have this in his range, so I can bluff with impunity on the turn. In summary, I would like to show that exploitation and game theory optimal strategies are basically two sides of the same coin. I believe I show this by using the thresholds to understand exploitative strategy quantitatively. What do I mean by that? I mean that a lot of players that argue for exploitation, which exploitation does maximize EV. That's what they're trying to argue, and they're also arguing that GTO doesn't matter because GTO is two computers with 5,000 elo playing against each other to basically have a non-exploitable strategy, and that there's nothing to be learned by that. You players that feel the exploit uh, that feeling can be shown in a solver, and I argue that what you see are the hands that are at the thresholds of indifference. I think arguing that one is better than the other, exploitation and GTO, is actually nonsense, and they're the same thing. That's basically what I'm trying to get through in this whole video, is that GTO and exploitative strategy are the same thing. If you have any questions, please post them down below or email me. I think my email's on YouTube. If not, just post them or inbox me on YouTube, and I'm happy to talk about this with you. And I would just like to say thank you again. My name is Nick Canavino. I love talking about poker strategy. Uh, I'm a no limit, mid stakes, no limit hold'em player, and I do this for a living because I was put on this earth to play poker and I love it. Please like and subscribe, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.